All of us are at the lowest rung of the economic, political, and social ladder in every country in the Americas. 2019 marks the halfway point of the UN International Decade for People of African Descent, and its mission remains true. Now more than ever, we need to recommit to globally recognizing, protecting, and celebrating individuals of African descent. Racism and xenophobia remain pernicious and prevalent in the United States, and I've spent my career in Congress championing the rights on Afro-descendants, fighting discrimination both here and abroad. Moving forward in the 116th Congress, I hope more of my colleagues will join me and co-sponsor my resolution recognizing the Decade of Afro-Descendants, calling for justice, recognition, and development of Afro communities. During my time in public service, I've had the great opportunity to travel to Colombia. I've been moved by the strength of the Afro and indigenous communities in that country. The urgency of my activism in this region increased tenfold after I had the opportunity to meet with Berta Cáceres, an environmental activist and indigenous leader who was assassinated about a month later in March of 2016. She was assassinated for her work fighting corruption and environmental abuses. Since then, I have introduced the Berta Cáceres Act, which would suspend U.S. funding to Honduras for police and military operations until the Honduran government investigates the gross human rights violations by their security forces. Activists like Berta and our esteemed panelists here today are fighting against the same oppressors that black social leaders in the United States battled during the civil rights movement and still fighting today. Our shared goal of achieving equality unites us across the Americas, and I'm so very pleased that our panelists are able to join us today to discuss these important issues. I also want to thank WOLA, CIPRA, the International Institute on Race, Equality, and Human Rights, as well as Julio Huete for their partnership and the work they've done to make this week a success. But before we begin our panel, I would like to introduce one of our local guests. It would have been Councilwoman Anita Barnes, who is an at-large member of the Council of the District of Columbia and who is currently the chairwoman of the Committee on Housing and Neighborhood Revitalization, but she got caught up in a meeting and could not attend, so therefore her staffer, Emmanuel Brantley, is here. And I might add that Councilman Barnes pushes policies that will expand tenants' rights, increase opportunities for home ownership, preserve and increase the district's affordable housing stock. As you know, gentrification is occurring in full onslaught mode in the District of Columbia, and soon it may not be any African Americans living in the district. But she's working to put an end to displacement of longtime Washingtonians. And in addition to creating and preserving affordable housing, Councilmember Barnes has been vocal about the needs to improve the district's public school system, expand violence prevention initiatives, and promote the idea that government is a force for good in society that works to protect the health, safety, and well-being of its citizens. She would have been here today to introduce a proclamation in conjunction with our panel honoring this week as DC Afro-Latino Heritage and Culture Week to recognize and celebrate the local Afro-Latino community and support the International Decade of Afro-Descendants. But because she could not be here, she sent her staffer, Emmanuel Brantley. Mr. Brantley will introduce on her behalf a proclamation. And sir, would you come forward?
Good afternoon, everyone, and once again, welcome to the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation's 2019 Annual Legislative Conference, and welcome to this incredible panel discussion, The Decade of the Diaspora, a conversation on the Afro-Descendant experience in Latin America. My name is Emmanuel Brantley, and as stated, I am the Communications Director for At-Large Councilmember Bonds. She has a commitment as an executive member of the Black Caucus of State Legislatures, so she couldn't be here today, but of course, this is super important, so I'm here in her place. To Congressman Johnson, the champion of Georgia's 4th Congressional District, thank you for inviting our office to take part in this special occasion. To the esteemed panelists and guests, from near and from far, welcome to the District of Columbia. We hope that you enjoy your stay, and we thank you in advance for sharing your knowledge and insights on these very important topics. Let me start by saying that it is an honor to be here, not just to celebrate the resilience of the Afro-Latino community, and not just to marvel about the many contributions that they have made to society at large, but to help set the stage for broader conversations about a community that we know has largely and unjustly, and for far too long, gone untalked about in mainstream settings. We here at the District of Columbia know that Afro-Latino communities, both here at home and around the world, have cultures that are steeped, have cultures that are steeped in history, cultures that are rich in tradition, and cultures that are among some of the most diverse to exist. We also know that these communities are full of artists, scholars, and activists whose existences were not only consequential, but are also pure and continued sources of inspiration for so many of us. And we also know that we are better and stronger when we acknowledge and celebrate this, especially when we do so publicly. As Congressman Johnson stated, the United Nations has declared this decade, January 1st, 2015 through December 31st, 2024, as the decade for people of African descent. And this February, at the start of the 116th Congress, numerous members of the U.S. House of Reps, under the leadership of Congressman Johnson, reintroduced House Resolution 133, which, and I quote, puts the spotlight on communities of African descent and seeks to expand their access to social, economic, and educational prosperity. Well, in light of this incredible effort, the United Nations designation, the commemoration of the 400th year since the arrival of the first African to the present-day United States, and with the understanding that National Hispanic Heritage Month kicks off this coming Sunday, September 15th, I am proud to announce that on this Tuesday, when the D.C. Council resumes session after recess, Councilmember Bonds will introduce legislation to establish the second full week of September in the District of Columbia as D.C. Afro-Latino Heritage and Culture Week. At this time, I would like to ask Mr. Julio Guiti of the Sustainable Development and Climate Change Organization and Mr. Manuel Mendez, Chairman of the D.C. Afro-Latino Caucus, to join me, and I will read a few clauses from the resolution. To designate the second full week of September as D.C. Afro-Latino Heritage and Culture Week in the District of Columbia. Whereas the members of the Council of the District of Columbia celebrate the many long-standing social, cultural, and economic contributions made by the African descendants of Latin American and Caribbean persons living and working in the District of Columbia. Whereas D.C. Afro-Latino Heritage and Culture Week will present an opportunity for district residents and visitors to share in and promote the history, customs, and values of the diverse Afro-Latino American communities. Whereas the members of the Council of the District of Columbia support the United Nations designation of this decade as the International Decade for People of African Descent, and larger efforts to promote the themes of recognition, justice, and development for all persons of African descent in the District of Columbia and around the world. Whereas through the coordination of local, regional, national, and international efforts, the government of the District of Columbia and other governments and entities can foster and strengthen the cooperation necessary to engage Afro-Latino communities, increase civil, civic, political, and private sector partnerships among them for the duration of this decade and beyond. Resolved by the Council of the District of Columbia that this resolution may be cited as the D.C. Afro-Latino Heritage and Culture Recognition Resolution of 2019. Again, thank you all, and I look forward to this incredible panel discussion. Thank you.
and gentlemen, without any further ado, I want to now turn this meeting over to our moderator today, who is none other than Dr. Ramona Houston. Dr. Houston enjoys a multifaceted career as a scholar, speaker, and community impact strategist. Her work centers on American race relations, higher education, and social responsibility, with specialized expertise in African American and Latino relations. Dr. Houston currently serves as principal of LIRA Strategies. I know I didn't say that right. What is it? Kalira Strategies, a boutique consulting firm that focuses on social responsibility. The firm also helps socially conscious businesses as well as entertainers and athletes make an impact on their community.